Thanks, everybody, and welcome to the Tracy Kronzak episode of Why It Matters.
Damn it, you
And
totally preempted me on that. I was
I know, I
about
got
to do
out
my
there.
usual.
I got right out there before you could call me stalwart. So,
like a mule.
Thanks for tuning in. We are really excited that we are now seeing Why It Matters on multiple channels and multiple frequencies. So we would love to know who is listening in, and we can see that people are, so that's very exciting. But we'd love to know who you are. So drop us a line, let us know. This episode, we are joined by our guest, Tracy Kronzak. And what we realized is that we never, we just kind of kicked this off and we just hit record one day.
Yeah.
And
so a year ago,
talking.
by the way, this is
that's
happening
amazing.
at an important time for us because Why It Matters as of September 2021 is a year old.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wait, is that your birthday too?
No, my birthday's in August.
Oh, September.
Yeah.
I totally heard August when you said that. I do not look great right now, and I'm aware of that. Connor, you can feel free to just cut that out. Or leave it
no, we're leaving all of that in.
Oh, great. Perfect. All right. Okay, so we have been recording now for a year. It has been so easy and so delightful to have amazing conversations with each other and with a stream of incredible guests. And what we realized is we have never taken the time to actually say who we are. And so we're going to do 2 episodes. We may join them, but we're going to do 2 episodes where we are interviewing each other. So this is my turn to interview Tracy. And so welcome to the Tracy Kronzak Why It Matters episode.
I am going to set aside all of my profound discomfort because I am used to being in control of this process, from booking guests to introductions to formulating future topics. And now none of that is in my control. So I am just going to set aside my profound discomfort with this and answer
it's an
Tim's
illusion anyway,
questions.
right? So
no, it's real. Control's
okay,
real.
great. Good.
Russia,
right, yeah.
Control's real.
Yeah, keep
China, control's real.
All right. Full name.
Wow, that's already getting into some fun stuff. So the full name that I legally have is Tracy Michelle Kronzak. Michelle's a family name, and the full name that I use is Tracy Isadore Michelle Kronzak, because when I was ordained in the Temple of Isis, I took on the name Tracy Isadore. And Isadore means in adoration of the goddess Isis.
In which language?
It comes from the Greco-Roman tradition, actually,
okay.
Believe it or not. It's not actually Kemetic Egyptian, which is where most of my practice lies.
Yeah. All right.
Right out of the gate.
I know. Like, yeah.
Boom.
So we just found out your birthday, but what year? We're just gonna do age. Like what year were you born?
All right. I never own this because my personal philosophy on being in IT and most explicitly being in IT and not being a 20-something is like, at some point your motivation for working in IT is somebody puts a framed picture of the glue factory on your desk and says, don't go here. But yeah, I was born in 1973. So I have incredibly fond memories of the 1970s, like deeply ingrained, influenced by my family, which everybody in my family, the youngest people, were 5 years older than me. So, I could have fallen into like the early 80s stuff in music, but instead it was like, here, kid, let me play you some Eagles. Let me play you some Paul Simon. Let me play you some Led Zeppelin. Let me play you some like Steve Miller Band.
I was hoping Steve Miller Band was going to hit.
Oh, Fly Like an Eagle, baby.
Yeah. Right.
I like
Yeah.
an eagle. So, it's that's so I have musical tastes that are about 5 years to 10 years older than me. Uh and it took me more time to get into punk, new wave, and early hip hop in the 80s than a lot of my peers, because I was like, what is this crap? I'm listening to Steve Miller. What is this? So,
Awesome. Where was that childhood?
childhood was centered in two places. So, true story, my father worked for his entire life, really, for a government subsidiary company that built altimeters and built guidance systems for the Navy, and Navy missile systems. So that that company was centered in New York all the way up until the mid 70s. And then the state of New Hampshire, in a move that I think still has ramifications today in terms of why New Hampshire is a purple blue state instead of a red state, they incentivized white collar investments in the burgeoning areas of southern New Hampshire by providing tax breaks to all these companies to leave New York and come up and like recenter on southern New Hampshire. So we moved from Middle Village, Queens, for those of you who know New York City, all the way up to southern New Hampshire, which was pretty darn rural in that day. My town had maybe 4,000 people in it total.
Oh my gosh.
So it was
From
like
Queens
farmer.
to 4,000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on the other side, we had 4 acres of land. So it kind of made for this idyllic childhood in a lot of ways where, I just could go outside, play on
Yep.
the land,
Yeah.
ride my bike, do whatever. And we would visit my mother's family on Long Island almost like clockwork for the entirety of the summer. So I would go to Long Island for the summertime. I would return to southern New Hampshire with a New York accent. And then over the course of a year, it would disappear and turn into sort of a North Boston, New England accent. And then I would go back down to New York with that, and it would sort of winnow its way out again over the summertime. And, all the sports family stuff was real. Like, New England and New York pretty much hate each other in all arenas. So, like, that was fun witnessing that, at ball games and whatever else.
Do you follow sports? Like,
I did
did your
for a
family,
while.
but you don't now? Or okay.
I like them. I
Right.
ski, but
Yeah.
like I don't follow it anymore like I used to. Like I got like the big thing in my family, the family event was the NFL. Giants, Jets, Patriots. And I kind of got really disheartened with the NFL about 5 or 10 years ago because lo and behold, there's a lot of sexual abuse and cover-ups that were happening, and also a lot of misogyny baked into its approach. And I was like, okay, great, yay! Like, saw the Giants win a few Super Bowls, saw the Pats win a few Super Bowls. I'm just letting this go because it hurt too much to watch it, knowing that that was the backdrop of the sport. Now, beyond that, like, I'll go to a San Francisco Giants ball game like once every year. It's about it.
Gotcha.
When we had such
But
things
never on
in
TV.
the
You
before
don't
times.
you
Oh
don't
God,
watch
no,
golf
no, I'm
or
no, no, no,
yeah.
no,
Okay.
no.
That's,
I watching golf, and if it's like watch golf or slowly pull your eye out, I'll take slowly pull your eye out.
I was just
9
thinking
times out of 10.
ESPN the Ocho, but I think that was from Dodgeball. Is that what movie that was
It
from?
might have been. I saw
Oh
that movie
man,
when it came out and never
yeah.
revisited it. It
If you
might have
could
been,
dodge a
yeah.
ball, if you could dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. I love
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
All right, great. Um, Childhood. So we know where you were. Childhood was pretty idyllic. Um,
There were some
then what?
abuse things that
Wait,
were
do you have?
happening to me as a child that I'm not going to get into, but suffice to say, in my adult life, it's given me incredible insight into what PTSD looks like and how it shapes a person's perspectives and reactions to the world. And because of that, it's also connected me in some really weird places. Like, I make no secret of the fact that I'm sober. um you overlap,
Congratulations.
thank you, you overlap with a lot of vets and a lot of folks who have had traumatic childhoods and lives in that arena. And yeah, it's funny. I think it's one of those things where I'm grateful for that insight into the world, because it has shaped my own sort of path for myself when it comes to what I think of as peace and serenity versus what I think the world tells us that should look like. You know,
Yeah. Um, yeah, that tracks with who I know you to be, a fundamentally authentic person.
much
And
sometimes to my own.
well, that's the price of authenticity, right? So, um, okay. What are 3 key events that shaped you?
Oh man. Okay, this was the one that you were like, I'm gonna ask you this. God, what did I say? I said there were 3 key events in my world. I think uh key event number 1 was coming out to my family. I had been brought up to believe. Now, to contextualize this, my family is on my mother's side 100% Irish. Irish Catholic, Irish cultural, Irish everything. Like, I do remember my grandma, who was second generation. So her parents came in from Ireland, and she was either born there and brought here, or she was just born here. I can't remember exactly, but definitely second generation because she was in the United States. But grandma was super Catholic, but she would also do things to make sure that, the fairies were appeased. And that's a very culturally Irish thing, right? Like, I don't believe in fairies, but just in case, we're just going to put a little salt on the windowsill. We're going to put a little oil here. We're going to do this there. Um, and so that was part of the influence. My father's side was Russian German. And, in all cases, like, your family's everything or it's nothing, right? That's just the way that you look at that. And because most of my father's family had passed before I was born, or right around the time I was born, it really was my mother's family that shaped that perspective. So, I don't think this is a story I've ever told, but it has shaped my perspective on justice in this world for a long time. And that is, when I came out, you know, that sort of idyllic visit your family turned into we're going to do an intervention on you, and we're going to kind of trick you to come down and visit. Uh, and we're all going to behave awkwardly. And all of the things that you thought were okay and normal are not. And no, you can't share anybody's bedroom, for your sleeping bag. So you can sleep in a hallway now, because we're all afraid of you. And, I left that sort of weekend intervention fall of my freshman year, with my family, and I never looked back. And it was one of my cousins who gave me the heads up, and they were like, hey man, not for nothing, but like, you think you're going to be dragged to church tomorrow with the family, but you're going to be dragged to a medical intervention site for shock therapy, conversion therapy, that you're going to be expected to check yourself into. And I was like, well, okay. So I kind of
Wait,
evaluated
how
my
old were you?
option. This would have been freshman year of college.
Okay.
So I evaluated my options, and after everybody went to bed, I like just rolled up my sleeping bag and threw everything in my car and left. And then I called them at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning when I had arrived back in my dorm room, and I said, I will never speak to you again. And I pretty much haven't. And the only person who came out of that as a bridge builder was my mother, and I have an amazing relationship with her now. But that's what it was. I mean, this was the early 90s. This might as well have been, the dawn of time when it came to the modern perceptions of LGBT youth and families and all that stuff. So like, it is what it was. So that was one.
Did you have any idea that's how they would respond? Like, were you like,
I had
this
no
might go
choice.
badly, or
I had no choice but to tell them or but to own up to it, because one of my cousins had already told them for me. Because I
okay,
was getting involved with activist work, and they spotted my name in one of the local papers up in Ithaca where I went to school. So they were like, well, we told the family. And I was like, great, thanks for that. Really, you know.
and did you hide that all the way through high school?
Oh yeah. Oh, I went to a Catholic high school. There's no way. But there were like, oddly enough, like there were 6 of us, like who I think were friends, and slowly one by one, everybody came out between freshman year and senior year of college. So we found the right people to hang out with
Right.
in high school, right? Like we found
Yeah.
that. So yeah, that was event number 1. Event number 2 was I started at my college as a material science major, which was a fundamental mistake, as we all now know, because Tracy and math is just not like a happy
Material
union.
science.
Yeah, material
What is
science.
what's material science?
Material science is the study of how things like metals and ceramics and other key elements interface together to create new sort of compositions of things to accelerate different desired end games. So at the time, people were searching for superconductors at
Yep.
anything, warmer than absolute zero.
Right.
People were
Yep.
looking for new ways of creating transistors. So that was material science.
That sounds like a lot of engineering.
Oh,
Is
it was ton of engineering, ton.
huh?
Yeah, yeah.
That's an interesting path.
It was. But I mean, remember that the sort of fundamental directive of my life was doctor, lawyer, or engineer. That was
Oh,
what you
got it.
be.
Okay.
Like, and I was honestly the first person in my family to go to a college that wasn't a military institution. So like huge amount of pressure.
Yeah.
So I started filling out of that around the same time that this whole crisis erupted with my family. So I was navigating 2 things at once fall freshman year, the family and the fact that Tracy, as I was not cut out to be an engineer at all. So
I agree with that assessment, by the way.
yeah, most people do. So I switched majors to Russian and East European studies, which at the time was a very nascent major at my school. And I studied that for 4 years, and I got a scholarship to travel to Moscow and Russia in that sort of corridor. And year 1 was summer of 93, which, to contextualize this, was the same summer as the hardline coup against Boris Yeltsin. And year 2 was summer 94, which was the output of that. And what I was doing was at the time interviewing folks who were then super optimistic LGBT activists, because they were like, oh, Russia's going to become a democracy. Russia's going to modernize, and we have an opportunity here. And, what we now know in 2021 is none of that came true. And in fact, approval of same-sex relationships in Russia over the past 30 years has gone down and not up. And the church has reasserted itself as the dominant cultural force. But at the time, that was not the thinking. But also at the time, like Russia was falling apart. So, I
You're like
joked.
trade machine guns for bubble gum, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
like
well, pretty much. I mean, like, I have so many stories from that era, but, the thing that is true is it gave me a front row seat to what it looks like to be a society that is substantially wrestling with democracy and not doing well with it. And the inefficiencies of nation state building as we perceive it in the United States, and the outcomes of broken promises as we have outlined them as a country to other countries. And if that all sounds familiar, it's because we're just living through it again right now with Afghanistan. But we made many promises to Russia that we didn't keep. Society was falling apart. If you know anything about how the Soviet economy worked, it was all centralized. So that meant that independent parts of the economy couldn't function without other parts of it on board. And when that collapsed, that meant that there was no production. Hyperinflation kicked in. Like, you could trade $1 for 10 rubles at the start of the week and $1 for 100 rubles at the end of the week. People's savings were disappearing. There were riots in the streets, like gunfire, like mob taking control. It was the early indicators of the rise of the authoritarian Russia that we now know were fomenting right then and there. And you know, why that was such a key moment in my time is because it's the moment in time that I reference now when I say there's red alarms going off all over the place in the United States. The other thing that I don't really talk about much from that era, but is also true, is when I was in Russia in 94, I have a great story about how I kind of got in on a not so legal visa and how I had to get out on a not so legal visa by essentially pretending to cry at the border control and like betting on the fact that this clearly 55 or 60-year-old career Soviet, like, you know, military woman didn't want to be bothered with like a blubbering American, which worked. But no, summer 94 was also the summer that I witnessed a murder and couldn't do anything about it. So, you know, the mob had asserted itself all over Russia. And that was sort of the foundation of the oligarchs that we now see.
Was there a
But,
big difference between 93 and 94? Like when you went back the second year?
you know, it was sort of like the wave crashing and then the crashed wave. That's the difference, metaphorically speaking. Like,
Mhm.
people already were like, wait a minute, like George H.W. Bush didn't deliver, you know, a knight in white shining armor to us. And Boris Yeltsin's kind of a uneducated alcoholic and corrupt as hell. And we have no control over our lives and our economy anymore. And everybody's poor and this sucks. You know, so yeah, that was a day that I never talk about really anymore. But, you know, I was walking with a friend outside of a metro stop, and there was a guy, old guy, in like basically rags on his knees in front of like three guys with his suit, with suits. And I looked over and they were maybe about 100 meters away from us. So not so far away that I couldn't see what was going on, but far enough away that I couldn't do a damn thing about it. And I looked over right in time to see one of the guys reach down beneath his like belt, pull out a knife that I swear to you was like 12 inches long and just shove it right up through the other guy's neck and into his head. And my friend who was with me saw that too. And I just looked at him and I said, what do we do? And he's like, we walk away very quickly is what we do. And that was a really difficult and like that was the moment where I was like, I am never coming to Russia again. And, you know, just to put a coda on this story, a lot of friends of mine from that era either left the country or disappeared, like literally disappeared. So I don't know what's going on over there anymore. And the irony of it all is my mother really wanted to go to Russia for years and years and years and years. So 2011 rolled around and it was looking okay. And we booked one of those like super safe, slow moving American tour things. And I went back to that same place where I saw that guy get murdered, you know, 18 years or however long that was prior. And the whole place had been converted into a brand new children's park. It was kind of weird. I was like, okay.
Interesting.
So I think that was moment number 2. And I think moment number 3
Wait,
happened.
what's the moment there? That's not the murder. I think it was the murder, right? Was
No,
it just
it
like
wasn't. It was just the experience of it all. It was just the
do you speak
experience of
Russian?
it all. Da.
I mean,
Я
Okay.
чуть-чуть говорю русский язык, но сейчас not so well, you know.
I think some people are going to want to know if you prefer Russian or Klingon.
Uh
I'm,
I
I'm just saying, I'm curious.
you know, the thing is I prefer Klingon because it's totally fake. And I have a lot of fun with it. And I know the origin of it, which was Jimmy Doohan trying to like fake a language being recorded as a Klingon in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And somehow Star Trek World ran with that.
No
Um,
way.
yeah. And
So,
like, but Russian has my heart, and it's really funny because now I'm a real lover of Southern Europe. I love, you know, I love Barcelona, I love Italy, I love Greece. And I try to learn these languages and they come out in a Russian accent. Or like I will try to learn phrases in like Italian and I'll walk into the store and I'll be like, Dobre dien. And the lady will just look at me and I'll be like, sorry, I mean buongiorno. You know, like it's just it activates the same area of the
yeah,
brain. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. Oh,
but
that's
that
great.
whole moment of understanding what it looks like when a society is desperate,
Yeah.
that was a moment. And I
When
think,
I know that
oh, go
we're
ahead.
parked on this for a while, but it's so interesting. When you were studying, so you studied this for 3 years
Three and a
before you
half
went
years.
over, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Did you, when you were studying it, did you see this coming? Like when you were
Yes
like,
and no. Um, because the philosophy at the time was like everybody kind of saw the Balkans coming a mile away, right? Like
yeah,
the Balkan War, people were like, oh, yeah, that's going to be bad and it's going to be ugly. Now, what nobody foresaw was that some of those countries, like Croatia, Slovenia, they're like EU members in great standing now, right? People are like, oh my
yeah,
God, how'd you do that? Right.
yeah,
But it's through picking priorities, right? And that's really what the major was about. And so we spent a lot of time saying, like, what's the priority here? Are you reforming your economic system? Are you reforming your political system? Are you reforming your culture? You can't do more than one of these things at a time. They kind of have to be linearly sequenced and they have to all be interdependent. And then we would all kind of scratch our heads and be like, man, Russia's really a problem because they're trying to do everything at once. And the Americans are saying, like, we got your back the whole way. And I think, you know, Russia trying to do everything at once and America saying, we got your back the whole way, which is a very simplified way of describing this, um, was kind of why Russia is an authoritarian state now,
yeah, right.
you know?
Looking for a strong man at the end of that.
Yep. And you know, Putin, man, he knew how
Found
to
one.
play that game from
Yeah.
start to finish. You know, so like, you know, that's the famous CIA
It's so
story, right?
interesting to think about that because Zagreb is like one of my favorite memories was staying in Zagreb for a couple of days. And
Beautiful, I've been
I
told.
just could not imagine it as, the Balkan War, but
Yeah.
yeah. So the CIA, as you were about to say the
Oh,
CIA,
yeah,
I was
that's the
hoping that
CIA
you would.
story. Well, I mean, I joke occasionally, but I don't think folks actually know this story that I was recruited for the CIA at the end of my college tenure. And, you know, at the time, the whole gays in the military thing was happening, right? And hashtag thanks, Bill Clinton. So except hashtags didn't exist back then. So we were just like, you know, angry. We didn't have hashtags to take away our anger. We just had anger. And so this guy tried to recruit everybody in our major program, as it turned out. And there were only like 17 of us. So it was kind of evident to all of us what was going on. And he was, to this day, he was like the most nondescript human being I've ever interacted with in my life. Just a very gentle guy in a suit with glasses, white guy, of course, you know, like that's all I remember.
What does
And
one say when they are like proposing that you be a spy?
oh, well, you know, he was kind of like around the circle on it. He was like, so
I mean, did the program know? Was he part of the
no,
program?
I have no
Okay.
idea. I really
Uh,
have no idea. But I
yeah.
know that like he was connected to us through somebody. and he was like, oh, I really want to talk to you. And like, what do you want to do next? And I was like, well, hell if I know. Um, and yeah, he's like, do you like to travel? I'm like, I do. He's like, would you
Do
like
you
to,
like to listen in on other people's conversation?
you know, I mean, the questions he was asking were so like broad. He was like, do you like to, would you like to continue studying Russian? And I was like, yeah, maybe, like, and that was his hook. And he was like, well, what if you came and worked for us and we put you through the government intensive Russian program? And I was like, government intensive Russian, which by the way, the American government has all of these language intensives. So like, and I was like, interesting. And he's like, you'll travel and, you'll learn how to sort of fire a gun. And I was like, I just
How do
looked
you
at him.
feel about high-speed chases?
I'm like, part of me at the time was like, does it come with an Aston Martin? And part of me was like, I kept looking at the guy, and after about 10 minutes of him describing this, I was like, are you a 3-letter agency? Are you FBI or CIA? And he was like, well, we are definitely part of the government. Yes. And I was like, your people don't take people like me, because I was very, very openly queer at that point. And he was like, well, we do make certain exceptions for high profile and talented candidates who have the ability to exercise discretion over their lifestyle, or some such answer like that. And I was like,
I think of you as a really discreet person.
I'm totally discreet, man. You have no idea the Unabomber factory that's in my house, right? Like,
yeah, there you go.
so I kind of looked at him and I said, this is over. I was like, this is done. I am not being an agent of the United States government in enforcing its little sort of democracy games. Thank you very much. I'm leaving. And I picked up and left. But it turns out 2 people from our program did take him up on that offer. I presume they went out to the farm, and like, we never heard from them again. Like, none of us ever heard from them again. And we're like, oh, okay, well, there you go. That's what you do when you join the CIA, I guess. So, yeah.
That is so interesting.
So the last key event in my life, I think I'm going to change from what we were talking about right before we hit the record button, because I realized that the answer that I gave you really wasn't a key event. It was just something stupid and obvious I should have realized all along. But what I will say is I had
what
reason.
was it? I want to know what you should have realized all along.
Just, business, I'm gonna crib Mark Benioff here and say the business of doing business in this world is to grow business. And I'll just leave it there, but anywho, and I am really intentional when I say is to grow business. But nevertheless, the third thing that I had real opportunity to just revisit recently was actually being poor, like being broke ass mother effing poor. See, I'm trying not to cuss. The kids tell me I cuss too much, so there you go. Uh, and that happened twice in my life. So, it happened early in my childhood. My father died when I was 12. And the sequence of events that set off was interesting because we were very comfortably middle class. And then we weren't. And within 6 months, it was like pensions, Social Security, food bank stuff, you name it. Like, it was all there, handouts from the family. And, I think I don't really have a context for, anything other than that in my life. And, it leaves a person, and it leaves me with like that sense of like, when are the resources going to disappear all the time? So, that happened early on in my life. And I've, again, never told this full story. I only allude to it. my first job because of that was picking strawberries in the field with the migrant laborers in New Hampshire in the blazing heat of summer. And because I needed to make money, I parlayed that into doing yard work for the rich people in town for several years, from like 12 to 15. It's probably safe to say this in 90, not in 90, in 2021, but, I got a real job at a bank when I was 15 by telling the bank I was 16. And I did teller work. And there's a lot connected to that. Like my mom got her associate's degree. She got a job at a bank. And, I was so damn grateful to have that job. And everybody was like, this job, all you do is work this job. I'm like, well, this job is paying for stuff. Uh,
So you were 15 in high school. Was your family in a situation where this wasn't your own spending money in lieu of allowance, but this was like, groceries and,
it
gas
wasn't
money for
that
the
bad.
family?
I will say it
Okay.
wasn't that bad. I had friends who
Mhm.
were hard up worse,
Sure.
whose parents were like subsistence hunters, for example, right? And it was like, well, geez, if dad didn't bag a deer, we didn't eat, right?
Okay. Wow.
So like we weren't there. So this was in lieu of anything else. This was like either I have spending money or I don't.
Yeah.
And I would occasionally buy stuff for the house, but that was just what it was.
Yeah.
Right. So it
So if you
didn't get
wanted cool
so,
clothes and Lunchables, do you remember those?
yeah, God.
If you then it was the bank money, right?
Yeah. And those were horrible when they came out, and they remained horrible.
But super
For
popular.
I don't know
Yeah.
why. We
Yeah,
like
me either.
horrible
I agree.
things as a
I
country
guess
that are
so.
super popular. I'm like, milk crate challenge comes to mind.
Yes.
But
Yes. Good
you know,
analogy there.
uh nevertheless, like I worked. Most of my friends in town, now remember, my town was undergoing this amazing transformation from like rural poor kids to like
Mm.
young people who were like the children of these like white collar workers that the state of New Hampshire imported, right? And you could
So
arguably
strong us
say
versus them and a
strong us
population
versus
bomb.
them, strong
Right.
like values clash, but you could
Right. We were here
arguably
first.
say like that was the beginning of purple state New Hampshire right there.
Interesting. Yeah.
um
Wow.
and so I have other stories from working as a child for the rich folks, like the alcoholic grandfather who's like entertained himself by drinking and watching me work, which I always thought was super creepy.
Oh yeah,
But
that's super
he paid
creepy.
me my best wages too. Like he paid me $25 a day, and that was like a deal for 6 hours of work. Um, but I remember when I got that job, because my mom was like, after a few months, she was like, what do you think of the job? And I was like, it's indoors and it's air conditioned. Like that was the extent to which
Yep.
I had thought about it. And
Right.
all of my coworkers were like, hey, do you want to go outside for lunch? And I was like, no, thank you. I'll
I
eat
spent
lunch.
years outside.
Yeah, I'll eat
Yeah.
lunch in here
Right.
in the kitchen where it's air conditioned. And very occasionally I had access to the giant safe below, and I would eat lunch down there because it was even cooler. And that was it.
Do you think your family, if your father hadn't died, would you have worked, or you wouldn't
I
have
don't
needed to,
know,
so you'd have had
because he
summers
was
off?
making good money for what he was doing back in the
Sure.
era.
Well, did your
Uh,
siblings? You had siblings that were like
nope,
5 years older,
only
right?
child.
They didn't work.
Those are my cousins who
Oh.
are 5 years older.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't know. I might have just turned out to have been like an entitled asshole kid. I might have. But
Yeah.
these experiences are what gave me my perspective of what it means for justice and equity and long-term investment in communities and in the world. And what I didn't have in rural New Hampshire that I got later was the language of it around race, around gender, around ethnicity, around class, and around all the things that now sort of people kind of take for granted as existing language. That was all being created in the time that I was growing up in the 90s in college and thereafter. But, and it was obviously built on a lot of work. So I'm not saying that it came out of nowhere. It built on a lot of work. But
Mhm.
I just didn't have the language for that experience. And I learned the language for that experience through the people I met and the encounters I had, because that was time one when I was poor. Time two when I was poor was when I moved from New York to San Francisco, largely just to get away from the East Coast entirely. Like I was like, I'm done. Like I broke with my family substantially. At that time in my life, my relationship with my mother was still very rocky. And I was like, I'm done, I'm leaving. But because of who I am and how I present myself, I was having trouble landing jobs. So like the best I could get was like assistant manager at a salon, or like the job that I really like, assistant manager at, a food company. So San Francisco was the landing zone for all of us who have ever felt excluded from the world, where we tried to create a different inclusive community. And the only problem was for me in that era, which would have been like 99 to 2001, like my career kind of just stalled out. There was no concept of career, for me. um
Well, if you study
you know
Russian, then don't go there.
right.
Like, what
I
do you
studied
do?
Russian, didn't go there. I worked
Yeah.
for a private foundation that was eventually going to close its doors in New York. So like I had started working in nonprofit stuff, but I underestimated the amount of systemic barriers that were present to my own fiscal success in that era. And so consequently it was like paying rent or eating were the choices sometimes, not doing both at the same time. And that gives a person a perspective on some of the excesses of what would become the first and second dot-com booms in San Francisco, later on, where it's like you see friends, doing whatever, and you're looking at like a trash bin saying that pizza doesn't look touched. Like that's the dichotomy of the life I lived back then. And it really wasn't until I kind of joined a foundation again in 2001, 1 week before September 11th. Like, holy cow. That was a trip in itself, being a new staff member right around that time. But it wasn't until that happened that my nonprofit career kind of re-elevated again. Um, and I think in retrospect, it was kind of pure dumb luck. Like people don't always get lucky. That's the perspective I've had in my life. And I think, what I say a lot to people is my perspective on things is frequently different from other people's perspective. I think largely because of the fact that I've had to learn to play the long game in my world in a way where, like, true story, my ex and I had a house in Oakland for a few years, about 10 or 15 years ago. And there was this giant brick barbecue that it was built clearly in the 20s when the house was built, and it was falling apart and it was horrible. And I just wanted to get rid of it. And everybody was like, well, then pay somebody to haul it off. And I was like, fuck that. I'm going to get this thing with a sledgehammer. I am going to take tiny pieces of it and I'm going to hide it in my trash as I'm emptying my trash once a week with the city of Oakland. And through the course of like 6 months, it will go away. And it did. It took 8 months, but I nailed that thing with a sledgehammer, broke it into tiny bits, hid those bits in the trash that the city of Oakland had to pick up, and it went away. But I think in ways that are like, what if we started doing these small things now and made big, huge things later, rather than like, what's the instant reward and gratification? Because I'm not used to instant reward and gratification, right? I'm just not. And that's okay. So there you go.
I wonder if that's one of the reasons you and I connect, is because I also, well, I don't know if it's also, I have a distrust of things. I have a distrust that things can be fixed quickly.
Yeah.
It's not my lived experience. And,
nope.
2 chapters later, that's the problem. Is, you know, the quick fix is the problem. So I think that that's interesting. I think
It
that's
is. I mean, it also informs how I play like Settlers of Catan. So, you know,
what is your going strategy for sellers?
or for Settlers.
Yeah.
First of all, we're no longer helping the kids because wow, we just got trounced by the youngest very recently. And secondly, the going strategy now is I try for disconnected ecosystems of highly uh highly useful materials. So when I set up my pieces, I don't care so much if I'm going for like longest road anymore, because what I'm trying to do is play a long-term resourcing game.
Yeah.
Uh,
Portfolio. You're
yeah,
trying to get a portfolio.
exactly. And it doesn't matter
Yeah.
if those two things never connect and they're on
Yeah.
either side of the board.
Right.
But the other thing that I try to do when I go for longest road is I see if I can take a coastal route, because most people start by trying to build inside. And I'm
Yep.
like, no, screw that. I'm going to build on the coast.
You'll
And
never
just
make
like,
it.
you know,
Yeah.
I made it once. It was amazing. But yes, it's
Nice.
hard to do if you're going to do that.
No,
on
I
the
mean, if you
coast.
go interior, you'll never
Oh
make
yeah,
it.
if you
Like,
go interior, it's like going
if
into the
you're
Hunger
more than
Games.
2
You know,
players, like
oh
don't
no,
even try.
no, don't even try. But yeah, so it's like longest road goes coastal, and you hope nobody notices by the time it's built. You know, so yeah. But I mean, yeah. So you know that's the formative moments in my life that I've always brought to what I want to do in this world. You know, I used to say to many people, I'm not here to make money for you. I'm here to serve nonprofits so that they can help people like me get out of the lives that they're living. Right. And it's hard when we work in a world of IT that demands a 6-month horizon on return on investment, when I go into jobs that are only about sells or co-selling. And it's like it sets up this cognitive dissonance that I can't live with, because I find the means by which much of that is executed to be grossly inapplied to what is actually necessary. You know,
Yeah.
call me a dreamer. Maybe I've stopped dreaming. Maybe that's the problem. I don't know.
No, I don't think you have.
So.
I mean, it's not. I'm not being dismissive on that. I'm saying, like, you and I work and talk with each other. Like, I know that I think you're better at predicting which dreams are possible or not. And I think you're better about not. In the time I've known you, I feel like you've honed your sense of what doesn't matter and which things do. But you pay
Yeah.
more attention to world events and large meta pieces. You pay way more attention to those than anybody I've ever met. And I think that that's interesting. Okay, if you were not where you are today, where would you be?
Oh, that's a good question. One of 3
And
places.
would you prefer to be there?
Okay. I mean, the honest answer is if I were not where I were right now, I would be homeless. I would not prefer to be homeless, but that is generally one outcome for folks that have lived the kind of life that I've lived. And, you know, that's okay. I think if I weren't doing everything I was doing right now, I say this a lot, and that is I was a classically trained researcher and writer, and I love to write. I think words are less they're less science and, you know, much more art, and every word has its own flavor and nuance to communications. And it dismays me that as a society we've become less attenuated to those nuances over time. But at the same time, like, I love writing. I love writing. I love it so much, like, that I can barely get ideas out sometimes, and other times I'll stay up all night writing something. So I think I would be a writer. That would be another possibility. And if I weren't doing what I was doing at all right now, there's also an equal likelihood that I might go into politics, or might have gone into politics. Because up until this year, I sincerely believed that the democratic process was the way to change America. I don't believe that anymore. And that's an outcome of the Trump administration and the events of January 6th. I think now, as a country, we're on a dangerously anti-democratic path, and no amount of rabble rousing is going to change that. So I've shifted my focus to things that are nice and meaningful, like, Livermore Pride is nice. If I can get involved in our city's planning commission, it's meaningful because it'd be nice to have bike lanes and think about what it could mean to have like mixed income communities and that sort of stuff. But those are three possible destinations of where I might be.
Interesting. We've known each other since, I think we've known each other for 7 years.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years. Yep.
There's absolutely no question you're happier than I've ever known you to be in the last 2 years. So
yeah.
So I think it's interesting to listen to what else, like where else you would be, especially homeless, because I think when you came out, that was a really vulnerable state. Like you became an orphan essentially at that point, and I mean a lot of the nomadic youth that hang out on Haight and Ashbury and travel the coasts, a high percentage of those are out and abandoned by their family. So
that is
really glad that you are.
Yeah, even with some very good education credentials, that is absolutely true that could have been my trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, if you couldn't have handled the emotional stress of that and what was going on in university and dropped out,
which I almost did, by the way. I almost did.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't take this. I'm going to just quit college. Funny story. My neighbor growing up, related to college, even, he said to me once, he was like, you will go to school, because he was a Marine. He was like, you will go to school. And he landed at Iwo Jima legit for real in World War II.
Whoa.
Yeah. And he because the bank that I was working at offered me a path to becoming a loan officer out of high school. And that looked really attractive.
Yeah. Yep.
And he sat me down and he was scary. But he was like, you will go to school. I did not land at Iwo Jima and watch my friends die so that you could become a fucking loan officer, is literally what he said to me. And I was like, okay, Mr. Stillman, whatever you say, Mr. Stillman, thank you so much. But it's true. And
I mean, that's pretty interesting that a neighbor would have that much interest in a youth living on their street.
He kind of stepped in when my dad died, right? Because dad died when I was 12. So he kind of showed up there,
That's amazing. Yeah.
That's amazing. So that's just a little bit about me, where I think we're at time, but I don't know if that motivates anybody to understand why I'm doing this.
Yeah, we didn't even get to the lightning round, and we didn't even get to hear about you becoming a priestess. Like, nobody's a priestess anymore.
Oh, so, yeah, that's but I've talked about that a lot. I've talked about that a lot, and I think.
All right, well, let's do the lightning round. Okay, here we go.
Important. All right.
If you had one do-over, would you take it or no? And what is it?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. What makes you happy?
Serenity.
What makes you sad?
Anguish.
That is what sad is. You can't just pick that. You have to what? Never mind.
Well, okay. So what I said to somebody recently was, there is a lot of anguish when systems fall apart, right? And America is a system that, by virtue of what I see, is not holding itself together well. Afghanistan is falling apart. There is so much anguish in knowing who you are in those places of absolute torment in the world, and knowing there's not a damn thing you can do to get out of it, no matter how hard you try, because it's either bureaucratic or systemic or discriminatory or based on your past or based on your future or somebody else's evaluation of you, like the hurdles are very high and the cracks are very wide, but you have to have lived through it to understand what a person literally feels in those moments. And for a lot of people, in my opinion, it's anguish.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else to do. It's purgatorial, right? Like the definition of purgatory is being close enough to God to know what you're missing, right?
Interesting. I didn't know that.
I mean, I think that's kind of like the concept there, right?
I think
You either
I
go to
don't know.
heaven and you get your eternal reward or whatever everybody conceptualizes of, or you go to hell and you're eternally damned. But there's this purgatory structure in some faiths, and it's like close enough to know what you're missing and far enough to miss it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of people in our society get trapped there, and it does a number on self-esteem and sense of accomplishment and sense of future and sense of hope and possibility.
I will allow anguish. You have convinced me.
I try. The kids love it when I lecture them.
Favorite food?
Favorite food is lobster.
Really?
Really.
Oh, all right.
Followed by like a good filet mignon.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Surf and turf.
Amen.
Favorite color?
Green.
Favorite movie?
That's tough. I have like genres, like everything from like Boogie Nights to Lord of the Rings. So I don't think I can claim a favorite. I have favorite genres, you know.
All right. I'll allow that too, even though that's not a real answer. Thank you so much, as always, for being my friend, which has been, you know, your life experience shaped who you are, and is therefore shaped parts of who I am. And there are a lot of parts for you that I'm not grateful for because they're really, really horrible. But who you are because of them is a delight and a joy for many of us. And it's really great to actually give space to that history and space to those stories. So thanks for being your authentic self.
Yeah. Thanks for being a friend and a mentor and a colleague, a coworker, a boss, family. Like, you and I have had a lot of fun. Thank you. I am so interviewing you, by the way, now, because like this was profoundly like disturbing. So thank you.
Yeah. My life is so boring compared to yours. Like, well, it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Cool.
All right. I'm Tim Lockey.
I'm Tracy Kronzak, and you've been listening to Why It Matters.
Why It Matters is a thought leadership project of Now It Matters, a strategic services firm offering advising and guiding to nonprofit and social impact organizations.
If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, check out our playlists, and visit us at nowitmatters.com to learn more about us.